Stress, if we aren't seeing it as a growth opportunity and diving into it, and it's setting off the distress alarms that are signaling threat to our amygdala, that what we call the reptilian brain, then that is actually putting our bodies into an inflammatory state that is taking resources away from reproduction, immunity, digestion, and all of the other organ systems that are critical, sleep, empathy, that are critical for good life, right? And it's putting them into our skeletal muscles and motor cortex and heart and lungs because it thinks we're under threat. That's what's happening on the biological level. And that can be dynamically changed by doing simple things like the breath, the movement, the touch, right? The music, the things that soothe us, remind us that we're safe, and then redirect resources back almost instantaneously to the recovery systems. And that's why they work.
Dr. Rabin, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, really honored to have you on here today. It's been an absolute joy researching you and preparing for this conversation. So 15 plus years, I think it said, you've been in understanding how chronic stress has impact human beings. So I think to kind of maybe kick the conversation off, I think everybody listening to this at some point has felt under stress or has felt the effects of stress. And many of us have probably pointed at stress as to the reason why we do or don't do certain things in our life. But I've never had anybody define it. So what is stress? What are we feeling? And what's happening to the body, I guess, at a physical level when we are under stress?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I think it really starts with, as you said, kind of defining stress. So stress is really broken down into two different categories. One is eustress, EU stress, which is, or good stress. That's stress that helps us, challenges us to grow, and is, helping us to become stronger, exploring better versions of ourselves, right? And then there's distress, which is the stress that we kind of attribute to or liken to chronic stress, which is relenting, unending overwhelm, which we all have faced, especially over the last few years. I think, it's undeniable that stress is really negatively impacting us. And, it's been tracked for a long time, but I think we know without a doubt now that when we don't, what makes eustress or distress eustress is a couple things. And it really comes down to having the tools to understand how to tackle or adapt to stress more effectively. And so we think about eustress and distress, and we can then, just by doing a simple thing like changing our mindset to, I am excited or grateful for the opportunity to grow from this challenge I'm facing right now, rather than why me? What's wrong with me that I have to face this challenge right now? Right? There are two different narratives about this, and from two different perspectives about the same experience. And so by starting to understand how we think about ourselves in that way, and the words we use to describe ourselves, we can actually empower ourselves to transform distress into eustress. And that is the whole process that we engage in psychotherapy, that we're working to translate down to everyone so that people can access these tools more easily.
Yeah, it's great. And I appreciate the breakdown there. So
And I can get into
it,
the biology if you want to.
yeah, I'd love to understand the differences, right? So if what you're saying is it's our perception that determines whether it's eustress or distress, is there a difference physically when we're under distress and eustress, or is our body kind of perceiving it, and then how it's interpreted versus eustress versus distress is just our mental perception of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and it's more than just perception, right? Like if you're experiencing starvation for a long period of time because you don't have access to adequate food, that is a distress by all means, right? And that is not at all something that's perceptual. It's very real. So it's the whole spectrum of, and there's lots of different things that contribute to this, but the reason why that starvation example is important is because when we enter into a state of famine or a state of being chased by a predator in the jungle, our bodies have evolved, as all mammals have, going back hundreds of millions of years, to engage a hardwired threat response that diverts all available resources, which is blood and everything contained in blood, to the organ systems that are critical for fight, flight, or freeze and getting out of a potentially survival threatening situation. That is critical to understand because that is what we evolved to do. Like we're all born by default with that pathway activated when threat is perceived. And threat and stress often get mixed because when we're under a lot of stress, our brain, we get overwhelmed and we start to mix up what is actually a threat. Like, is traffic actually a threat to my survival? No, it's actually the opposite, right? If I rush to get to work and act like I'm anxious and drive anxiously, then I am actually putting myself in greater risk of harm and other people. And so, by reminding ourselves that we're actually safe in those kinds of environments, we can, when we remind ourselves we're actually safe in those kinds of environments, that using different techniques like breath, soothing touch, soothing music, movement, things like that. And Apollo is one wearable example of that with soothing touch. Then you can help the body get into a safety state that allows us to be able to adapt to stress more effectively in the moment. And it helps us to shift perception and it helps us to actually face what we thought or were taught was threatening to us with courage effectively, which then allows us the opportunity to learn from what that experience is really trying to teach us without judgment.
Yeah, so let's get into the biology then. I guess what is physically happening at the body level when we are under stress?
So when we're under stress, like I said, all of the resources, the blood is going to heart, lungs, skeletal muscle, motor cortex of the brain, fear center of the brain, right? Those parts of the brain are, and the body, the skeletal muscles, for instance, are not that useful when you're trying to be creative in a work meeting or you're trying to drive home from work or you're trying to hang out with your family. That's when you want the resources going to the recovery sides of the nervous system, the parasympathetic system, which is the rest and recovery stuff, the digestion, the immunity, the metabolism, and the sleep, and all the stuff that the creativity, the empathy, all the stuff that's not critical for survival. And that's supposed to be activated by safety. So stress, if we don't look at if we don't aren't seeing it as a growth opportunity and diving into it, and it's setting off the distress alarms that are signaling threat to our amygdala, that what we call the reptilian brain, then that is actually putting our bodies into an inflammatory state that is taking resources away from reproduction, immunity, digestion, and all of the other organ systems that are critical, sleep, empathy, that are critical for good life, right? And it's putting them into our skeletal muscles and motor cortex and heart and lungs because it thinks we're under threat. That's what's happening on the biological level. And that can be dynamically changed by doing simple things like the breath, the movement, the touch, right? The music, the things that soothe us, remind us that we're safe, and then redirect resources back almost instantaneously to the recovery systems. And that's why they work.
Yeah, so those are mechanisms, those are tools, those are things that we can pull on in the time of feeling stress. Heart rate is already elevated. We can then kind of lean in some breathing, some meditating, like you said, the touch, great examples. And I know we'll get into what Apollo is doing there. Are there states though that are more susceptible to stress, right? You kind of gave the example there, right? With the running late in traffic and you're going to be late for work. That person probably isn't really in a calm, peaceful state. They're probably kind of rushed coming out of out of the door already. And they're kind of in this panicked kind of rushing state already. Had they maybe had, an hour in the morning, kind of journaled, meditated, prayed, kind of maybe got a workout in, they'd be a much more calm kind of state of mind. So are there states that are more susceptible to stress, and what can we do to put ourselves into those states?
Or out of, you mean?
Or out of? Yeah.
I think it's, I think the states that are the most susceptible really seem to be the transition states of the day, right? So transitions like going from sleepiness to wakefulness, wakefulness to sleepiness, work to play, work to meditation, meditation to work, right? All of these transitions are significant to the body because they require a change in energy and sometimes mood and vibrancy and all of these things that we don't even really think about when we get into those states. but it requires a pretty significant state change to go from wakefulness to sleepiness, for instance. And that's actually one of the things that most people struggle with more than any other thing is not being able to fall asleep. So just settling down, winding down the brain, whether it's because of all the things you said or because they drink, a light cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of stimulation that we're receiving that is making that transition really, really hard for us as humans. And so that's something that we're trying to rapidly build more tools to help solve. That technology actually works very well to solve when it's applied effectively. But it's all based on these ancient techniques of the deep breathing and the stuff that we're talking about of getting the body into a rhythm that is a rhythm of safety, effectively like physical, mental, emotional safety, where you just know that if you're going to enter sleep, which is our most physically vulnerable state of being, where we're completely defenseless for a good part of the time, especially in the deep and REM sleep stages, then we have to be safe enough to be able to be allowed to fall asleep. And the challenge that a lot of people have that they don't even realize is that even having a thought, allowing ourselves to pay attention to the thought that there might be something wrong with us that we can't sleep, there might be something wrong with me that I can't sleep, just allowing myself to pay attention to that thought is creating a stress that activates that prevents that transition smoothly. And it creates an internal threat. What's wrong with me that I can't sleep? Going back to the words, right? And the words that we use then have a physiological connection that change the way that our brain is wiring to associate ideas and memories around meaning.
Yeah, what as you're talking about this, I'm glad you brought up the sleep because it is something that I know so many people struggle with is this insomnia, right? This kind of constant kind of just endless loop of thoughts throughout the night. It's like there's no end to it. You know, it's a reoccurring kind of cycle, night in, night out. Sometimes it's a thought, like you're saying, is I'm not good for, I'm not good enough to sleep, or I'm always going to struggle with this. Sometimes it's they're thinking about. I deal with a lot of guys that are struggling with guilt and shame in and around maybe some of their behaviors or some of the things that they're struggling with. So, what I guess role can maybe guilt or shame play in this thought pattern at night, or even just constantly being in a state of stress?
I mean, it absolutely contributes to it. I think but there's a lot of reasons why we feel guilt and shame, right? They're not inherently bad things. They're signals, they're like emotional signals to us, like all emotions are, that are signaling something to us that we are supposed to be learning from. And once we've learned that thing that we're supposed to learn, then, we can grieve the loss and allow ourselves to grieve the loss, which often occurs, and then, process that grief and that guilt and allow it to pass. And that's really the process of healing from these kinds of things, which involves a lot of forgiveness and a lot of self compassion. And and sometimes it requires talking to somebody else to figure out how to unpack a lot of those feelings of guilt and shame and how to put words to your experience that help you understand what's really going on underneath it. And we do a lot of that work with people, and it's very effective. And ultimately, to your point, you know, it's similar to the idea of having silly thoughts that many of us have had, like there's something wrong with me that I can't sleep, when we were literally, I assure you, we were born to sleep. The evidence is unequivocal in the history of living mammals that there are no mammals that were not, from what I know, born to sleep. All of us sleep at some point, and we're meant to sleep, and we're meant to sleep well. And it's only when we get in our own way that really like disrupts that. And so, if we notice that we're having thoughts of guilt and shame that come up that are disrupting us from getting that peaceful, restful sleep at night, that's a really good sign that there's something there that needs to be addressed. And it's not necessarily good or bad. It might be really, really good, and usually it's really helpful and healing, and might be challenging, and it might be not so bad, not so challenging at all. But it's not helpful to really think about it in the form of like good and bad. It's really more helpful to think about it as these are opportunities for growth, and we're really just exploring our potential by understanding ourselves better.
Yeah, no, I love that. Talk to me about touch because I know that's a big piece of what the Apollo does, and I believe it's probably some of what you uncovered in some of your research that touch was an underlooked tool. You know, I think you mentioned a couple different things that we can use in times of stress, breathing, meditative practices to kind of calm our nervous system. Oftentimes, though, I believe that those can be difficult in the time of stress, right? It's like, God, I'm already here. How do I bring my nervous system down? So talk to me about touch and how did you kind of stumble upon this?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it was exactly what you were talking about. So, we were working with patients in University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and we realized that people who, especially people with PTSD and depression, were really struggling to learn meditation and breathing techniques, and they also weren't getting the results they wanted from their medication, or they were having side effects from their medication. And we started to, but we realized that there were also certain situations where they were feeling better. And those situations were like guided breathwork experiences, biofeedback type experiences. There were soothing massage experiences. A lot of them had service animals that were really helpful to them, and provided a sense of touch that was really restorative and helped them get through the day and function. And then there were other ones who, listened to music a lot. And these were all rhythmic things that people are doing. And when you look at the literature and then you combine it with the literature of that stuff, and you combine it with the literature on, folks who are doing, other practices and other touch massage practices and yoga and meditation, mindfulness, and all this stuff, everything really points to, when you map out the nervous system, which is what we did at the university during that time, from the sensory system to the emotional brain, there is there are direct connections for positive emotional feelings that are hardwired also. Just like there are threat hardwired responses like we talked about earlier, there are also positive emotional hardwired sensation pathways that are neurons that go throughout our whole body, and they innervate almost every touch receptor on our body, and that's why soothing touch or loving touch from someone feels good, which again is hard to argue with, right? Almost everybody has almost a universal human experience, and also for all mammals. And when you look back, you can trace this hardwired pathway throughout the body and the brain. So, thinking about this and thinking about how soothing touch works and why it works, we decided to try to take the mechanism of soothing touch and put it into a wearable device, and then give people that wearable and see how it worked, and do some clinical trials. And we did, and it worked, and we launched in 2020, and now it's Apollo and looks like this.
So is that it right there on your shirt that you
Yep.
have on?
Yeah, you can wear it anywhere on your body because it's just working through the touch receptors. But effectively, we figured out that you can activate the touch receptors in a similar way to soothing touch from a loved one, with gentle vibrations of sound waves, like bass frequencies, but layered in a specific way to activate the touch receptors to make them feel like soothing touch feels, or like the way they do with soothing touch. And so that helps people feel not just more calm during the day and sleep better at night, but also helps people to focus and socialize better, because it can calm us in lots of different situations. And we've had a lot of trials on all that stuff, which is very exciting.
Yeah, so talk to me more about, obviously we want to point people to check it out, so we'll link up the Apollo website, but is it something you're wearing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Are you putting it on to sleep? You mentioned it. Like, I guess, are you using it prescriptively, or is it just throw this device on and it's going to improve these areas of your life?
So thinking about what we were talking about earlier, where the most challenging points in life that we have are the transition points, right? So that's when we're the most susceptible to stress, and that's when we need all the help that we can get. So if what we actually have done is we designed Apollo to deliver these soothing vibrations to the body called vibes, and we have 7 different vibes, and they range from energy and wake up, which is the most energizing, not really calming at all, just kind of more of a pure energy, to social and open. So social, which is like a creative social flow, to focus, which is a sort of rather intense, sustained, dedicated focus, to recover, which is like 5 minutes of deep breathing, to calm, which is like 15 minutes of deep breathing, and then relax, which is or unwind, which is it's kind of like a it's just like a deeply relaxing vibe, like deep kind of like almost like a rockabye kind of like deep relaxation before that's really great for winding down before bed. And then sleep, which is what people use in bed. And so effectively, the device works anywhere on the body, and you can strap it onto your body or clip it on. And most people wear it on their ankle actually to bed, and then schedule it. And you can save a schedule to wake. So I have it wake me up in the morning, and then keeps me focused in the morning, and then helps me have my creative time in the afternoon, and then wind me down after work, and then wind me down for bed, and then wake me up the next day. And so that regulates my circadian rhythms for me, which is what we've seen gives people the best benefit, which equates to about 30 minutes or 90 minutes during the daytime and 90 minutes at night, about 5 days a week seems to be what gives people the best benefit, vibrating that much time on the body.
Yeah. Now, obviously, with sleep, that's easily measured and tracked. How's it improving deep sleep, REM sleep? What metric or data points are you looking at? You mentioned you're getting great feedback. Is it just anecdotal case, like people are telling you that they're managing stress, or is there a specific metric or data point that you're actually able to track and monitor that it is improving?
So I'll start with the sleep stuff because that's the most exciting. When COVID happened, all the sleep labs closed down, and at that time, around 29 end of 2019, we had I don't know, we had like over about 3,000 people who had prototyped our device, and they were sending us like pictures from their Oura Ring and their Whoop and their Apple Health, showing us that their sleep was getting a lot better, even as just as little as one night of use, which was really interesting. And so we started to explore that with sleep labs, and then COVID happened, and all the sleep labs shut down for 2 years. So then we looked back at our user base and we're like, a lot of these people are likely to have Aura rings, and Aura has an open API for research, and that was super friendly of them as an organization. So I reached out to some of my friends over there, and I asked if we could use their cloud to do a research project, and we just invited our users to share their data to be part of our sleep study team, and we got over 1,500 people with just like 4 email blasts, and we tracked them for 3 years. And so we have like hundreds of millions of data points from these people using Apollo. Using Oura Ring for on average 6 months before ever receiving an Apollo, and then for on average like 12 months after receiving an Apollo. And we have their Oura Ring data from before ever using Apollo for months, and then a baseline, and then after, which is the most interesting data. And so when you start to look at that data over, we'll just narrow it down to like the 3 month block. What we're seeing is that people who use just adding Apollo to your life, just adding it to your life, taking away any of the other confounding variables and the way that people use it, doesn't matter, forgetting about how people use it and what else they're doing in their lives, just adding to your life will statistically significantly improve your sleep quality and duration. Just by adding it, no matter how you use it, even just using it one time. If you use it consistently, we see that people are getting up to 30 minutes more sleep a night that's concentrated in deepened REM over the course of 3 months. So this is what I was telling you about, the 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. People who are doing that are seeing, on average, 19% more deep sleep, 14% more REM sleep, 11% average increase in heart rate variability, and which is also what we're seeing in the double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials in cognitive and athletic performance at the University of Pittsburgh. Same percentage, roughly, I think it was roughly 10 or 11% increase in HRV, but in the moment, that's in 3 minutes. This is over 3 months, and it's cumulative. So we're seeing that people's biometrics continue to improve, and resting heart rate also, very interestingly, comes down by on average 4% in this population. So it's a huge change. That's like a change that is comparable to what you see from adopting a new exercise routine or a new meditation or mindfulness routine or a new yoga routine in the studies over that same 3 month time frame, where you have to take 30 minutes out of every day to actually do it. Just by strapping this on, you can get comparable benefits to your body by improving your sleep and circadian rhythms, most likely, and just giving the body the benefits of soothing touch on the go, which are also parasympathetically activating. So we have 7 trials now that are complete and 12 more underway, but this is one of the most exciting ones that we're publishing on now.
Yeah. Now, all of this data, the 19% deep, 14% REM, the 11% HRV, that was all from the aura, right? Like you had that aura data that you had access to. Was there any concern there, or have you guys looked at other studies outside of that data? I guess why I would pose the question, right, is because the people that are already using aura rings probably are checking a lot of other boxes already in their life, right? Like if you're tracking your sleep through an aura, you're probably paying attention to what you eat. You're probably paying attention to your training. You're probably paying attention to other factors within your life, which are going to lead to maybe having better quality sleep right already out of the gate. So if you have a person that's off the street, isn't training, isn't really paying attention to their nutrition, isn't paying attention to some of these other factors, do you think that you would see these same numbers? Would it be a decrease? How do you think those factors would would show up?
I mean, it seems to be consistent with what we're seeing. I mean, Aura, around the time that Aura was being used in the study, or they were basically mainstream. I mean, Kim Kardashian and Gwyneth Paltrow were using Aura rings, and these people are not people who are particularly. I mean, not them, but the community of people around them, and the moms and the general community of people who were using Aura ring around that time were not particularly skewing towards health conscious. And, a lot of people in our study, as when you look at those kinds of results, as it's an observational study. So it's really looking at what happens across the population. And there's a lot of people who don't see improvement, right? It's just that the overall trend is towards statistical significant improvement, which is really interesting because there's so much variability in the population. But long before we did any studies like this is, the long-term real world study. We did two double-blind randomized placebo-controlled crossover studies at the University of Pittsburgh that are with people, one of which was with collegiate athletes, that showed that Apollo statistically significantly improved HRV within 2 minutes in the recovery phase after intense exercise. And there's never been a wearable technology that's ever been demonstrated to improve heart rate variability. So that's a metric of resilience and improved recovery. So that's a really exciting biomarker to follow. And the other study that came first, actually, that is in the publication process, is a study of cognitive performance with people who came in off the street. And what was really interesting was that giving Apollo vibrations to them within just 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, improved reliably cognitive performance. And in some people, up to 25% more cognitive performance, as measured by accuracy on this very, very challenging task that NASA gives to astronauts before they go into space to test their ability to perform simple tasks under extreme frustration. So that this is like a real deal, like cognitive performance task. And this was and applying the vibration was calming people. It was increasing heart rate variability and their subjective report of calm, and their heart rate variability, as we probably talked about, heart rate variability always goes down under stress. Unless you're doing a meditative deep breathing or flow state exercise in your stress, like athletic performance, your heart rate variability is going down, because as you get stressed, as heart rate goes up, HRV, which is the difference between each beat over time, shrinks. And so your HRV will always go down invariably under stress. Always. Cognitive stress, however, is interesting because when you're in a cognitive stressor situation, like you're in a meeting and somebody's looking at you funny across the table and you're like, why are you looking at me like that? Did I say something weird? And then you start to get into a brain loop or whatever. Or you're just like trying to finish out a standardized test and you're really like, racing against the clock. That increases heart rate because your body is perceiving threat as if we're being chased by a lion in the jungle. And so all of our resources in those moments are getting, like we were talking about earlier, they're going to the skeletal muscles and the lungs and the heart and the parts and our motor cortex and the parts of our brains that are trying to fight or flight or freeze. And that's not helpful during any of those situations like the standardized test, right? That's the opposite of what we want. And so when you actually apply Apollo to people in those kinds of environments, or you have them do a mindfulness or a breathwork exercise, either one will work. Or you give them amphetamines, that will also work. In the same studies, they're all introducing similar levels of cognitive performance improvement, up to 25%, by doing these body calming exercises. And so we saw that Apollo was hitting those kinds of numbers in a double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled study where nobody knew what vibrations they were getting, and there were two placebos, and there was absolutely no way that it could have happened by chance. Like the study was so rigorously done at the university that there's absolutely no way that we could see this amount of improvement this consistently across the users. That was also consistent with HRV improvement, and everything was in line. And so that was kind of the aha moment for us, where we realized that this technology could really help a lot of people. And then we started doing more studies with patients as well, with different illnesses that have the same problems that regular people have. They just have them more often and worse. And so we have done a lot of studies with populations of people with treatment-resistant mental illnesses and physical illnesses, metastatic breast cancer, and autoimmune disorder. And we see just a lot of benefit to people because being calm helps us heal. And that's really what it comes down to. And it's okay to be calm. We're allowed to be calm. It's not indulgent. It's something that we work hard for, and we deserve it.
Yeah, it should be the preferred state for all of us. Like, it's a much better place to operate from. We talked about HRV quite a bit here, and I know that there's going to be a portion of the audience that maybe doesn't fully understand what it is. I think you mentioned it's kind of the space in between the beats. Can you spend a bit of time there, explaining heart rate variability and why it's such an important part of our stress recovery, our overall well-being?
Sure. And it's probably like three biometrics that are really helpful to track if you're going to track anything that are, or three or four that are really the most important. But HRV seems to rise to the top most recently, which is really interesting because it is a measure of effectively our heart's adaptability, which is like measuring how recovered we are. So when we're in an optimally recovered state, our body is like ready to take on whatever comes our way. We're like sharp, fast, right? Clear when we're fully recovered, fully rested. That's a really nice feeling to be in. And that state, for most of us, tends to correspond to a state of high heart rate variability, which is, again, the amount of time between each beat of the heart as it changes over time. So it's the rate of change of the amount of time between each heartbeat. And so as heart rate goes up, so if you think about as heart rate goes up and you have to cram more beats into 1 minute, then the amount of time between each beat shrinks and then heart rate variability goes down. That's stress. Physical, mental, emotional stress, that's stress. And so when we deep breathe and we do things that slow our heart rate and then introduce like meditative states, like starting at like 5 to 7 breaths per minute for most people, you can start to fairly rapidly, like within 90 to 120 seconds, see real improvements in HRV and see it start to change over time. And as we learn to sync that, our breath rate and our heart rate rhythms, and do more breath work, then we can actually train ourselves to enter those states very effectively, which is really interesting. And then our HRV we can track over time and it goes up. But ultimately, low heart rate variability correlates with high likelihood of illness and high likelihood of or low likelihood of recovery from illness, effectively. So we don't, if our heart rate variability is low, and everybody's kind of different, so I can't tell you exactly what low is, but it's probably like 20 or less. If you're tracking it, you want to start doing things that are trending it upward over week, month over month. You want to see your HRV trending upward. And it's a cool metric also because it represents the infinite capacity of human potential to adapt and become stronger, because there's no cap on HRV, right? So it's kind of a really interesting metaphor to think about, that who knows how high our HRV can go. Like, who knows how well we can train ourselves to master our bodies in this life, right? Like, there's a really, really cool concept around just self-discovery that arises when you have a metric like that, that we know we don't want to be low, but we want it to trend up, and there's no cap on how high it can go. So let's see what happens,
So what are some of those things that we can begin to do? I mean, obviously we mentioned the Apollo can trend it up, but what are some other things that we can do that can lean it trending upwards?
So it's the same 4 to 6 things I mentioned before, which are like I would say the pillars of health, and which are also the pillars of like control in our lives. So those are how intentional breathing, intentional movement, intentional touch, and intentional listening or singing, which is the output of sound, and then hearing yourself experience it. And touch can come from yourself or from someone else with consent, of course. But those are the four major things. And the two others that we have control over roughly at any time are nutrition, nourishment, and what fuel we put into our bodies, and sleep. And those are really the foundational tools that help with practice restructure our nervous systems to function in a way uh, that favors recovery, that favors healing effectively. And then there's a bunch of perceptual thought techniques we use too that we were starting to talk about earlier. But um, you know, the main idea is doing the practices is really what invokes the change. And the more that we do those practices, the better we get.
You mentioned HRV being one of maybe 3 or 4 metrics that we really want to pay attention to. Would deep and REM sleep be the other two? And is there a fourth one?
So sleep, yes. Deep and REM are interesting, but the problem is that the wearable trackers are not particularly accurate right now. I think the most accurate wearable trackers are hitting like a 65% accuracy for deep and REM sleep. So, they're consistently inaccurate. So when you're trying to do a study, if you're doing a study and evaluating like 1,500 people over 3 years of data, you can accommodate for the variability because of the inaccuracy of the measurements because you can track everyone across the whole time. But if you're just looking at your own data, it's just you, that amount of variability becomes significant, right? So we have to take the deep and REM sleep data on a one-on-one basis, kind of a grain of salt. You really want to track it over that. That's why we track it over weeks to months. So, anyways, the four metrics that I think are most interesting though are for most people are heart rate variability, resting heart rate, which is your heart rate when you wake up. And Oura Ring and Apple Watch do a great job of tracking that by measuring it only at rest. Oura is probably the best, and it tracks it only at rest when you're like sleeping at night and you're still, and that gets really accurate resting measurements of HRV and heart rate throughout the night, and then gets good resting data in the morning. We want HRV to be going up, and we want resting heart rate to be going down. So those are two very important signs of cardiovascular health, which are important signs of general overall health and well-being. Um, Another metric that's important is sleep, right? So really thinking about just sleep overall, however you want to quantify it, but it's really how rested do you feel during the day should dictate what our sleep habits are at night and how we kind of adjust our sleep hygiene to meet the demand that we need. And so if we're not feeling rested, then we probably need to adjust our sleep habits a little bit. And that is absolutely foundational. How you measure it, Apollo tracks sleep in Apollo Labs, which just came out, and you can see your sleep data through Apollo in that way, as well as many other trackers like Oura Ring and Apple Watch, and Whoop, etc. But they are providing you different forms of data, and you really just want like something that gives you a sense of the duration and the efficiency. Those are the two sleep data points that are most interesting. Duration is total time that you're asleep. Efficiency is the percentage of that time that you were actually detected to be asleep versus not asleep. So those are the four really most interesting sleep metrics. And there are others too that are interesting, but for now, deep sleep and REM sleep and sleep staging with wearables is not very good. So, they're interesting to look at and think about over time, but they're not that as relevant as the others for more immediate, you know, tracking. But tracking with consumer wearables also week over week is really the mainstay. Daily tracking, stuff happens so often that everything impacts HRV. Like thinking about stress impacts HRV. Breathing differently changes HRV. Standing up and sitting down 3 times will change your HRV, right? So all of these things change our biometrics all the time, all behavior. So really thinking about this on a weekly or monthly basis is really what is the ticket, and we want to trend the data in the right direction when over that time frame, and that is a sign that we're on the right track. And if we're seeing dips, then that's probably a sign that we're doing things that might be worth evaluating.
Now with the Apollo, I know because it's based on vibrational touch, I would assume that the effects are only lasting when we're using it. Have you guys been able to look at, if somebody uses the Apollo, 30, 60, 90 days post having it, do some of the benefits stay?
Yeah, it seems like some of the benefits stay for people. Most people keep using it even occasionally because they really enjoy it. So we have really and people are using it pretty consistently for long periods of time, and their usage changes, right? They decrease their intensity because they're more sensitive to it, and Apollo kind of trains your body to be sensitive to touch as well. So in a nice way. So you end up using less battery over time as you use it because you're more sensitive to the vibration, and you don't need as much. And yeah, it's literally a training tool for these techniques we're talking about, like breath work and mindfulness meditation. Using it has the effect that it has in the moment of changing the body with the vibration and impacting the autonomic nervous system, and it creates associative learning loops in the brain that help us to effectively learn how to breathe on our own, right? Learn how to take control of our attention and harness the moment on our own, which is something that we all have the ability to do. It just needs to be taught.
I know we've been talking mostly about stress and sleep as those being big two reasons as to why people would use this. Are there other mental health reasons as to why somebody would seek out and use something like or use the Apollo, or even with something like PTSD, like real long-term lasting post-traumatic stress disorder? Like, are there any research or any benefits people are getting there with it?
Yeah, we have a number of clinical trials that are ongoing, a few of which are just wrapping up now on folks with treatment-resistant uh, metastatic breast cancer and systemic sclerosis, and there's some PTSD studies going on as well. We have a study at the VA in Denver that is running right now with 100 folks with PTSD using Apollo for 12 weeks. Um, and we have a number of an ADHD study going on and traumatic brain injury studies that are ongoing. The early results of those have been very, very good. Of all of the ones that I mentioned that we have early results from, they've all been very good. And then we had some, PTSD studies that we did early at the University of Pittsburgh, that all were small populations, but they all came back overwhelmingly positive, like significant responses out of like 15 out of 16 people, and things that were just really, like, people were telling us that it was PTSD, which is who we really developed the technology for originally. Then later we realized we loved it. It was great for lots of different stuff. So we made it a consumer device for everybody to use. But ultimately, it works really, really well for folks with PTSD or difficulty sleeping, or, in particular, anything to do with trauma related on the mental health front. Those are the folks that benefit the most from it. Um, and so that's really exciting because there aren't a lot of tools available for those people.
And is that where you guys are combining some of the use of the psychedelic assisted therapy to those folks that are in the trauma stages?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of I run a clinic, psychiatry clinic that sees a lot of patients, most of whom are just regular general adult patients, and maybe about half of our patients do ketamine assisted therapy work with our team, and we have found, as several other clinics have also found around the country, that combining tools like Apollo that deliver soothing touch to the body and help an individual feel a little bit more in control of their feelings before they go into a psychedelic state, or a deep meditative state, or any state that's vulnerable, is extremely helpful. And so people are using it, and we're using it in our clinic before, during, and after sessions with people, especially when it's their first time, or they don't have a lot of experience, or they're have some apprehension, anxiety going in, and it's been extraordinarily helpful. And we actually have a big clinical trial ongoing with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, where Apollo is being evaluated as an integration tool after MDMA assisted therapy for treatment resistant PTSD, which is really exciting. And so anybody who's ever been in a MAPS trial is eligible to receive an Apollo device, and participate in that study. And as sponsored by the Board of Medicine and Apollo Neuroscience. So please do reach out to us if anybody is listening and was a MAPS study participant and would like to get access to that. We're happy to connect with you.
Yeah, well, tell the guys, tell the audience where they can connect with you, where they can find the Apollo, anything upcoming. Obviously, you mentioned this. Any consumer stuff kind of excited about this year, and then we'll wrap it up with our last and final question, Dr. Rabin.
Yeah, so you can find Apollo at apolloneuro.com. That's APOLLONEURO.com. You can also find it at wearablehugs.com, which is a little bit easier to remember. And if you go to that website and click on the science button, you'll see a couple links, science and research, and you can go and scroll through all of our research studies and get a whole lot more information than I was able to give you today about all of the exciting work that we've been doing and the publications that are coming out. And you can also see opportunities for participation. So if you are eligible to participate in any of those studies, you can scroll down and find the MAP study there, and you can click on the link and fill out the survey, and we'd be happy to connect with you and get you your complimentary Apollo device for participating.
Awesome. And yeah, guys, we'll get all that information plugged down there in the show notes. We'll make sure to have all of Dr. Rabin's links and the links for the Apollo there as well. Dr. David, we're grateful for you. I know you've been feeling a little under the weather today. We're still really appreciative for you showing up here today and just dropping all your wealth of knowledge on us around stress management of it. In the Apollo device, we definitely want to make sure the guys check that out. We like to end every episode here with the same question. Obviously, the title of our show is called The Superhuman Life. And Dr. Ray, when I talk about living a superhuman life, it's a belief system. It's how I try to show up in the world every single day, and it's coming from the place that I do believe that we're here for a purpose. There's a calling placed on each and every one of our lives, but knowing that is not enough. We must be very intentional about our growth and how we bring that purpose to the world in service of others. So that's kind of how I define living a superhuman life. But I love to always get the guest takes. So, Dr. David Rabin, as we close out today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Mm. I think living a superhuman life probably could entail a whole lot of things. The thing that first comes to mind for me would be just living life authentically. I think really just accepting ourselves for who we are as soon as possible, and so that we can, really start to feel gratitude towards ourselves, right? And to really open up. We're talking about being superhuman is really about, to me, it's about unlocking our potential by reminding ourselves that it's safe to come out, right? And there's a lot of parts of ourselves that for many years, maybe even going back since before we were born, we're kind of told, hey, it's not safe to come out, right? And we are incredibly diverse, interesting creatures. We see that when we look at the diversity, the rich diversity across the world. And, I don't even think we've tapped, I don't think we've tapped 10% of what we're capable of in this life. So I think there's send you all off with that. There's a real opportunity to, um, to learn about ourselves and discover what we're capable of simply by just accepting ourselves for who we are and starting to change the way that we talk about ourselves and using more words that are, about gratitude and about self forgiveness and self compassion and self love that help us to stay in the vein of appreciation of what we have and acceptance of what we have whenever possible. And that is really, in large part, what creates a huge sense of safety for us and unlocks that superhuman potential.
Yeah, I love that, man. Kind of circle back to kind of where we started, and then we went kind of down in a different direction. But probably should have stayed more on that perception part, man. I think I would have enjoyed that conversation a little bit more. But this was great, man. I really grateful for you. Obviously, guys, we want to make sure you go check out the Apollo device, connect with Dr. David and his team as well. If
Can
you
I
got
add
value
one
to the
more?
show,
Can I add one more thing?
please.
I forgot to let everybody know that if you want to hear more about this kind of conversation that we had today, that was really fun and really started to dive into consciousness and what it means to look under the hood of the human experience, check out the Psychedelic Report, which is the first psychedelic news show. It's your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. And you can find us on Apple and Spotify. And we'll be giving you the weekly on what's going on in the psychedelic movement around legislation and politics, and also scientific and medical discoveries. So it'll be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, we will definitely link that show up, guys. Great for you guys. Make sure to share this one. Leave us that 5-star rating, written review. But for Dr. David Rabin, Frank Rich, your host here. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.